Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Richardson, Program Assistant with the Extension Master Gardener Program. And today we have the wonderful opportunity to have Dr. Joe Neal with us, who is NC State Professor of Weed Science and Extension Specialist with North Carolina Cooperative Extension. Dr. Neal specializes in weed management in nursery crops, landscape plantings, and Christmas trees. His research and extension programs focus on optimizing weed control for cost effectiveness and environmental stewardship. Joe is the co-author of the book Weeds of the Northeast, and the second edition of the book is now available and is revised and expanded to include the Mid-Atlantic states. So I've put the picture of the cover of the book up there on this slide. Today, Joe's going to review with us the principles of weed identification, including using apps and books. He's going to talk about weed biology, how they grow and spread so vigorously, and strategies that we can use to manage weeds in the landscape. Dr. Neal's going to emphasize weeds common in North Carolina and some weed control solutions that are available to consumers. So Joe, we are very grateful you're here. Thank you for taking the time to present to Master Gardener volunteers and extension agents.
All right, pleasure to be with you. Well, buckle up, folks. We got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm thinking, okay, it looks like, can you see the slides? Do you see the slides?
I do not see the slide. Okay.
Okay, just take it, you know, when I put slides
Sometimes
here,
there's a
it took
delay,
over
right?
my screen. Okay, let me, let's try something else.
I see title slide, if that's what you're.
No, here we go.
Okay.
Let's, here we go.
I think it just might be a tiny delay. Yeah. There we go, Joe.
Okay, now we're working.
Yeah. Great.
There we go.
Okay.
Now everything looks like it's functioning properly. Okay, you know,
Joe, let me just interrupt you for 1 minute and ask everyone, we have such a big group today. I failed to say, if you'd please keep your microphone on mute during the presentation, and then afterwards we'll have time with Joe for questions. But we've got over 300 people signed up to listen today. So if we keep our microphones on mute, it will help very much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So if you till up the ground in any gardening situation, you know, you're going to have volunteers, you know, and these volunteers we might call a weed, unless you are the type of person that wants portulaca in your salad. So in that case, this is not a weed at all. In fact, you want to get rid of those pesky begonias and get them out of the way so that your portulaca could grow uninhibited by the larger begonias. So what's a weed? A weed is quite literally any plant that you don't want growing in that space. Now, there are lots of common, species that we commonly encounter in our landscapes, common weeds that that are successful, because they have a lot of traits that enable them to, survive and thrive in our urban landscapes, and we have weeds from every biological category, for summer annual weeds, winter weeds, annuals, biennials, perennials, grasses, broadleaf, sedges, rushes, tree seedlings, root sprouts from shrubs. So we have pretty much any type of plant can be a weed in certain situations. But, the first step in developing any pest management program is to, one, learn something about the pest. And in this case, learn something about these weeds. Okay. But weed identification is more than a name. It really is that first step in learning something about that weed. How does it spread? How does it reproduce? Okay, what season is it going to germinate and grow and flower? when are the best times when you can implement some management strategies. So the weed identification is important, but the next step beyond knowing the correct name is to learn something about that plant, right? So, I am sure, everybody logged on to this session is probably an avid gardener, and you probably have an app on your phone for doing plant identification. Okay. And by and large, those apps are quite good. Okay. One of my colleagues at Michigan State actually tested the available apps, and this was done a couple of years ago. So your favorite app might not be on here right now, but in their research of testing the accuracy of the mobile apps, they found that quite a few of these apps were very good. The top performer for weed identification in their study was the app called Picture This. Now that is that there is a subscription, a couple of different tiers of subscriptions for Picture This, but if you just X out of that subscription window, you can use Picture This for free. You can't access a lot of the other useful features in the app, but you can at least get a potential plant identification. I actually use iNaturalist, and I found it to be much more accurate than our colleagues at Michigan State. But I think this illustrates a point that these apps are very good. They're getting better every year as more people start using them. The algorithms are getting better and better and better. But still, I want to point out that even though they are very good, even the best app, excuse me, even the best of these apps, pardon me just a moment. I just had a tickle in my throat. Sorry about that. Even the best of these apps were wrong 20% of the time. So you do need to use these apps, and I use them quite frequently. I use either iNaturalist or Picture This quite frequently. I find them to be very, very helpful in narrowing my search. Most of the time they're right, but some of the time they're not. And so how do I know when they're not correct? Well, that's where some other resources come in to enable you to go a bit further, to confirm that diagnosis, and to then learn something more about it. Now, you saw there are several weed identification guides appropriate for the region. There is Weeds of the South. Weeds of the South is really geared more toward agronomic weeds. But in horticultural weeds, I do recommend, and Weeds of the Northeast. I wrote the first edition while I was at Cornell in New York. So it was focused on the Northeast, but I've been here at NC State for 28 years. And all that time, I couldn't recommend this book. There wasn't another good book. So finally we revised it. And I said, by golly, by gum, if I'm going to spend 6 years revising a book, I'm going to be able to use it here in North Carolina. Harumph. Give me a collective harumph. I think I heard it. Okay, moving on. We expanded it to include most of the common weeds in North Carolina. And so this is now, it may sound a little self-serving, but let's face it, I'm not getting rich off of royalties on this thing. Stephen King, I am not. So what is in this? You get descriptions about the species. You can, the correct name, the reproductive stages in its life cycle, what it looks like as a seedling, what it looks like as a mature plant, but also what a lot of people appreciate about this book is the down at the bottom where I have similar species. So what else might this plant look like? Or what other species might you confuse with this? And this is where, if you've got the app and it says it's this particular species, look at the details within this publication. Look at the images of all of the different growth stages, and compare your specimen to the specifics in the book to have a confirmation, a side-by-side confirmation. And if it doesn't quite look right, you can go back to that similar species. It's like, is there anything else that this might look like? And most of the time, we of course have that other species in the book. Okay. So in using this book, you can not only focus on identifying the weed, but then you can look at its life cycle, its reproductive stages. How does it spread? And from there, you can do a better job with developing a weed control plan. Okay. So, when you're doing this comparison, looking at the images and reading the details there, one of the things you've got to be able to, you've got to know what characteristics to look for. Okay, what are the important characteristics that we use for identifying weeds? And I'm going to breeze through this because a lot of this should be review for you if you've had the botany chapter of the Master Gardener training, or just are an avid gardener, basic plant anatomy. So this should all be review for you. Okay, grasses are sometimes considered to be particularly difficult to identify, but our most common weedy grasses we can actually identify by using several characteristics within the leaf bud and around the collar region of the leaves. Now, let's see. No, you're not seeing my cursor, are you?
We are seeing your cursor. So
You are
go
seeing
right
my
ahead and
cursor?
use it.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's not showing up on my display screen. Okay, so where the leaf blade meets the stem and then the leaf sheath, this area we call the collar region. Okay, and within that region are several characteristics. The other thing we use for identifying grasses is the leaf bud. Now, here's how that works. The leaf bud, when the newest leaf is coming out, it's either going to be folded upon itself or rolled. Okay. And this is not the same thing as a flat or round stem. If you think about flat, if you pick up something and you think, oh, it's the stem of this grass is flat, it must be folded vernation or folded in the leaf bud, you'll be wrong half of the time. Okay, so you really have to look right at the newest emerging leaf. This one is folded on itself, just like two pieces of paper, a piece of paper folded together like that in the middle. And this one, you can see the leaf margin is rolled. It's rolled up, like taking a piece of paper and rolling it up. Simple as that. It's one or the other. There's no in between. Moving on to the collar region, if you pull the leaf blade back and you look on the inside of that leaf blade, right where the blade touches the sheath, there is an area there that we'll call, the ligule. And you can see in the center here, we call a tall membranous ligule. That membrane is the ligule. We're not talking about all the hairs around it, okay? We're talking about right there, there's just that membranous ligule. Now, other species have the ligule is actually a fringe of hairs, okay? Not to be confused with these long wispy hairs that are on the blade or the sheath, but the ligule itself is a fringe of hairs. Or that may be completely absent and this area is completely smooth, okay? So you've got three distinct options there. It's either membranous, a fringe of hairs, or it's absent. Okay, so you can categorize your grasses that way. Another thing to look for is right there at the collar region, if there are appendages of the leaf blade that seem to just wrap around the stem. That's called an auricle, and there are only two genera, two genuses of plants that have auricles. So you've narrowed your search immediately. And then you look for the presence or absence of hairs on, and where those hairs are. Are they on the blade? Are they on the sheath? Are they on both the blade and the sheath? Or on the upper side of the leaf? What about the underside of the leaf blade? And so the presence and absence of hairs will also be something that we are detailed in the description of plants in the books. And of course, seed heads, if you have a grass and you really, really don't know what it is and you need to identify it, all the taxonomy books are based upon the seed heads and the flowers of grasses. So, just last week I encountered a grass I had never seen before. I had no idea what it was. I couldn't key it out without the seed head. And so if we had the seed head, we were able to identify it. I took that to the herbarium where a grass specialist counts all those little bitty parts on the seed heads. So if you've got a seed head, that's the easiest way to get it identified, at least to the genus. Difficult to get it to the species, but to the genus, you can get it there. Now, one thing to remember is, there are some plants that look a lot like grasses, but are in a completely different family. The Cyperaceae, grass-like weeds, the most widespread group of weeds that look like grasses that are not, are sedges. And here in North Carolina, we have annual sedges and we have perennial sedges. The annual sedges, if you have a sedge, dig it up, look at the crown and the roots. And here on the right-hand side of the screen, that's an annual sedge. You see it's got, a bunch of shoots that we call tillers coming out of the base of that plant, and then it's got a fibrous root system. But to the left, we have yellow nut sedge, which is a perennial, and that is producing these rhizomes and daughter plants. And you can see it doesn't have all the tillering growth, all the little shoots coming out of the base there. It's going to have a primary mother plant, and then it's going to produce a rhizome and a daughter plant. And then those daughter plants will grow up and make more daughter plants of their own. And in that way, the plant spreads and reproduces itself. How do you know this is a sedge versus a grass? My grad student always said sedges have edges. The stems are triangular. So if you are able to roll this one between your fingertips and it's triangular, it is a sedge. It's going to be in the Cyperaceae or the sedge family. Now, we have two species of nut sedges or perennial sedges that we'll encounter commonly in North Carolina. Most widespread one is yellow nut sedge, and this is what's pictured here. Again, grass-like leaves, but if you dig down, you'll see these rhizomes, and it reproduces by tubers. Okay, so it spreads by rhizomes, reproduces by tubers. Okay, what about our dicots? Broadleaf weeds, of course, if you have a flower, that's easiest. You use your app. Most times, if it is a broadleaf plant that has a distinct colorful flower, then the apps will do a very good job getting you right down to the genus at least. But if you don't have a flower, it becomes more difficult to identify. And so we can use certain vegetative traits. The ones that I use when I'm looking at these plants and trying to differentiate between them or use their unique traits, growth habits, leaf orientation, leaf arrangement, leaf shapes, presence or absence of hairs. So when I say the unique traits, these are just some unusual characteristics that make this plant different than everything else around it, right? So for example, the presence or absence of thorns or prickles and where they are, Is the stem square, or does the stem have wings on it? Does it have a compound leaf? And if it's a compound leaf, what is the arrangement of those leaflets? Like the oxalis in the center here is 3 leaflets. Each leaflet is a heart-shaped one, and we refer to as trifoliolate leaflets. What if there were more than 2 leaves and coming out of the same node? That would be a whorled arrangements of leaves. Though there are very few species that have that arrangement. What if presence or absence of milky sap? If you break the stem, that's diagnostic just to a few families. So when you have a very unique trait like that can help you. All right. Now, most taxonomy books don't use growth habits, but in weed science, we find that's to be helpful. Is the plant upright, or is it sort of spreading? That actually can separate 2 different species of pigweeds. So what you see in this upright photo is, smooth pigweed. And there are lots of pigweeds that grow straight up, but there are also other species that are spreading type pigweeds, and we can separate the species that way. Vining type, does it grow and create a vine, or is it a prostrate or spreading type growth habit? Okay. The leaf arrangement, just as in your botany text, you've got alternate leaves, you've got opposite leaves, we have whorled leaves, but in the weed literature, you'll also have what we call a rosette, the basal rosette. And many horticultural plants will have this feature, or this growth or leaf arrangement, shall we say, where all the leaves are coming out at the same point at the base of the plant in a pinwheel fashion. So what's the difference between whorled and rosette? Whorled is you've got an elongated stem and you have more than 2 leaves at each node. In this case, all the leaves are coming out at the base of the plant, right? Okay. Simple versus compound leaves. Again, in horticulture, we're used to this. Should be review. Simple leaves, this is a leaf. Compound leaves, this long stem here is the leaf, and each of these small leaf-like structures here are leaflets on a single leaf. And the leaflets in a compound leaf can be arranged. In this case, we call it pinnately compound, or they can be palmately compound, like in this Virginia creeper or oxalis photo that I showed you before. Okay. We also, with broadleaf plants, we use the overall leaf shapes. Now, we're not going to try to turn you into taxonomists. You don't need to worry about all these Latin terms, but just think about, is the leaf tip pointed? Is the base rounded? Is it linear? Is the tip of the leaf wider than the base, or is the base wider than the tip? So we'll look at those overall shapes, but again, look for those very distinct characteristics, like these bindweeds here that have a very distinctive leaf shape. My grad student also referred to this as hedge bindweed. He said the leaves have shoulder pads, is how he described that one. And this one, could be described as sort of arrowhead shaped. Again, a good botanist in the crowd is muttering with their microphone muted, says, that's sagittate. Of course it is. Yes. And then, of course, look at the leaf margins, the entire leaf margins. This is the one term that you gotta know when you're looking at plant identification. An entire leaf margin means it doesn't have lobes or teeth. Okay. Why don't we call it smooth? Because we reserve the term smooth to differentiate from the presence of hairs. So it's hairy or smooth. In this case, the leaf margin without teeth on it, it's entire. And if it's lobed or toothed, those tubes can be shallow or they can be deep. And then you can have leaves that have, lobes upon lobes upon lobes, and we call that a dissected leaf. As I said, hairs, presence, absence, where are they? This is what we don't, this is where you would say, this one is hairy, mouse or chickweed. This one is basically smooth. And that is, common chickweed. All right, so let's sort of put those observation tools to the test. Obviously, we don't have we're not in person, and I can't ask for too much audience feedback here, but I want you on your own, just take a moment and think about 3 things that you see that set this plant apart and make this plant, look unique. Just going to take a few seconds. I want you all to do this. Now with my screen, I can't see your chat fields or anything like that. So let me just move on and let's see what I would say that you should be picking up on. This plant has an upright growth habit, which you can see here in this photograph. It's got an erect stem, okay? It's got alternate leaves. You see there's a leaf right there. There's a leaf right there. There's the next leaf, the next, alternating up the stem. This distinctive white, waxy, mealy appearance in the new growth. That is not an aberration of the photograph or the lighting or anything. That is very distinctive for the species. You see, there is some of that in the on the flower buds as well. And the leaves in outline, the leaf blades are basically triangular or roughly triangular in shape. You could call it deltoid in shape as well. And there are toothed leaf margins, or shallowly lobed with sharp pointed lobes on that leaf margin. So these are vegetative traits that you can use to identify or to confirm or reject identifications of species. All right, so we could do a lot more of that sort of thing, but hopefully you see the principles of how you apply all of this to weed identification. Now, once we've identified, we need to know something about it. You can go to the book and you can see something about its life cycle and how it reproduces. So in the world of weeds, we take our annual weeds and we put them into 2 groups. We have winter annuals, we have summer annuals. Winter annuals are those that germinate in the fall and early spring while the soil is cool and moist. And then in the summertime, they flower, set seed, and then die. So we have what I refer to, there's a weak link in the life cycle, okay? In late summer, these plants exist as seeds in the soil only. So you're not thinking of killing the plant, you're thinking about keeping that seed from reestablishing. So your cool season weeds like henbit, gallansoga, bittercress, horseweed, vetch, annual bluegrass, wild radish, and wild mustards, okay? These, and chickweed, common chickweed, mouse ear chickweed, they're all cool season plants. And so, if you've had a lot of those in your gardens, then remember that those seed are going to be germinating in the fall. So if you're going to do something to prevent those seed from establishing, you need to do it before they germinate. Okay, and we'll talk about the tools, but basically mulches or herbicides applied, for a winter annual weed, you're going to do that before they germinate. All right. Now, summer annual weeds, we have basically the opposite life cycle. This is the same schematic, but the seed germinate in the spring, going through summer. They're going to grow, produce fruit, and then die in the fall, usually with a heavy frost. Okay, so common ones that you'll encounter in landscapes: crabgrass, ragweed, spurge, morning glories, the lamb's quarters I showed you before, pigweeds, Virginia copperleaf, lots of summer annual weeds, and these will germinate in that springtime. So we have the opportunity before they germinate to try to do something to keep those seeds from germinating, and that's why we use mulch and put the mulch out in February. But again, if it's a winter annual, you needed that mulch out by the 1st of September to prevent the winter weeds from germinating. So just knowing something about that life cycle, we can improve upon our management. Okay, what about perennial weeds? Okay, we have lots of different perennial weeds, and they all have their own mechanism for dispersal and reproduction. Some are going to reproduce, most of course do produce seed, but then they have the ability to persist or spread by vegetative means and persist in the soil, with structures that are resilient and hard to control. So some of the real common ones, here we have mugwort or chrysanthemum weed in the upper left, and this pretty one in the center that is porcelain berry, and that has just been spreading and spreading and spreading in urban areas. It's related to our grapes, and looks a lot like our native grapes until it starts to produce these unique and distinctive fruits. Dandelions, plantains, lots and lots of perennial taprooted weeds. Poison ivy, of course, it's native, but I don't necessarily want that in my native garden, right? We have bindweeds. This is field bindweed. We also have hedge bindweed. This is, we have perennial grasses. This happens to be quackgrass. Johnson grass is another one, perhaps more common. Bermuda grass is even more common in our areas. Tree of heaven is spreading by seed. It also reproduces by root sprouts, right? So all of our perennial weeds have many different mechanisms for propagating themselves and spreading. So most of them do produce seed. Not all, but most of them do reproduce by seed. Some of them are going to produce rhizomes. The rhizome is an underground stem that produces new shoots. Some are going to reproduce by stolons. That's an above ground stem that produces new shoots. This is ground ivy in the picture. Tubers, of course, yellow nutsedge reproduces by tubers. Wild onion, wild garlic reproduce by bulbous crops. And there's one missing here, and that is a creeping root. Okay, we have a number of our weeds like the bindweeds and horse nettle that produce thickened roots, and each of those roots can, if it's severed from the mother plant, can develop a shoot bud called adventitious shoots from the roots. Okay, so these are the traits, these are the things that make perennial weeds more difficult to control. Yes, we can probably control them from seed using mulches and such, but if it's already growing, if it's already present and it has these perennial structures, then they're going to be more resilient to our control measures. All right. And speaking of control, this is sort of a summary. So if I in a way, I could sort of stop my talk right on and just talk about this slide, but I'm going to keep talking because that's what we do in extension. We just keep talking. I'm going to cover each of these tools and strategies for controlling weeds in landscapes. But this gives you a summary of what you're going to do in the winter. we start our planning process. What worked last year? What do we need to do? Do we need, check our, make sure our equipment is doing well? Did our sprayer work well last year? Do we need to do some repair work on that? It's also time to make sure we do get our mulches out before our spring germinating weeds can sprout. If you're going to use herbicides to control summer or spring germinating weeds, that's the time to think about that. We'll also need to think about the winter weeds that are already growing. We want to control them before they go to seed. And then as we move into spring, the grasses, perennial grasses, summer grasses will be growing. We can control them in late spring, early summer. Much easier to control Bermuda grass in the month of May and June than it is in August, right? Then the nutsedge starts coming up, and we have to deal with the broadleaf weeds that escaped our management plan here. We got to deal with them in the summer, but we also want to think about then the winter annuals are coming. So by September 1, if we had a lot of winter annual weeds, so if we had to do a lot of post-emergence control of winter annual weeds here, we know that we need to think about for fall, do some pre-emergent strategies for winter annual weeds. And we want to think about those perennial weeds. So a lot of times it's a lot easier to get control of those perennial weeds before they go dormant in the fall. You can find them, you can digging them up, spraying them with herbicides, that sort of thing. Best time to do that is in the early fall. Okay. So let's take a look at landscape weed management. It is somewhat complicated by the diversity of plants we have in the landscape. Like in this landscape bed, we've got, trees, shrubs, ornamental grasses, we've got flowering shrubs, some bulbs, and some herbaceous, ornamental flowers. So that diversity reduces the number of tools that we have in our toolbox to control weeds. Okay, so what are our primary tools for controlling weeds before they come up? Remember, we talked about the summer annual, the winter annual weeds. Can we prevent those seed from germinating and becoming established? Our number one, well, we can use mulches, we can use pre-emergent herbicides. Our number one defense against annual weeds is mulch, and it's very effective for many, many types of weeds. And this picture is just it. The only difference here was we put some pine straw mulch down, and that is, it controlled the weeds. So timing is important. This was before the henbit and the chickweed germinated. We got a mulch layer down, and it worked. The type of mulch that you use, honestly, weeds do not care. Any type of mulch you use, it will work as long as you have a layer of that mulch that is thick enough to exclude light, because that's what our mulches do. Mulches exclude light, and most of our weed seeds require some light for germination or for establishing from a tiny seed. Okay, they need sunlight right away to give them energy. But if you cover them up, they can't continue to grow. Okay, so if you're using organic mulch like shredded bark or pine straw, you want to get 3 to 4 inches, but no more. No more, no less. You want the Goldilocks effect, right? You want it just right. Any more than that, the weeds will start growing in the mulch. And then you start getting into problems of the mulch being too thick, piled up around stems, the little mulch volcanoes you see around town. That is not the way to use mulch. You want about a 3 to 4 inch layer of mulch, of organic mulch. If you're using inorganic mulches like, brick chips or stone or stuff, if you're using inorganic mulches, I do recommend putting a geotextile fabric down to keep your gravel or stone chips or whatever that is from mixing with the soil below. Okay. I'm sure you've all been on walkways where they put some gravel down, and over time that gravel just sort of worked its way into the mud. And now all you have is a muddy, gravelly area that's just a mess. But if you put a geotextile fabric down and then put the inorganic mulch on top of that, you will separate the mulch from the mud. Now, normally we don't recommend geotextiles, but that's the only situation where I do recommend geotextiles is if you're going with an inorganic mulch like stones, lava rock, brick chips. You want to have that separation of that material from the underlying soil. If you're going to use bark, rule of thumb, how much do you need for the first application on a new bed? 1 cubic yard will cover about 100 square feet to a depth of 3 inches. So that 1 to 100. Pine straw, it's all over the place, but as a rule of thumb, 1 bale of pine straw should cover about 35 square feet. Okay. And you will need to top dress this at every year or two. Okay. And when you top dress, you're just bringing it back up to that 3 to 4 inch layer, right? You're not adding another 3 inches. So you only need to add about an inch layer. Now, I think that's where a lot of landscapers kind of go wrong. They're replenishing every year and they're putting too much down, each year. And then you're adding the mulch faster than it's decomposing, right? Now, that's all for like woody landscape beds. If you're doing color beds, then you want a relatively fine textured organic mulch, and you only want about a 1 inch layer of a mulch that you're just going to work into the soil as soon as you transition that bed to the next season's color. So for that reason, I don't recommend the inorganic mulches in our color beds. Okay, a lot of people will edge their beds with pine straw or a heavier mulch layer, but within the planting area, you could just use some good clean compost as your mulch. The idea here is we want our annual flowers to cover the bed, to provide what we call canopy coverage themselves. When to mulch? I find it a lot easier to mulch around hostas in the winter when the hosta is dormant. Just spread the mulch over it, right? So typically it's done in the winter months, right? Get your mulch out in the winter months before the summer annuals germinate. You can cover some of the little winter annual weeds that may have germinated. If they're really small, you cover them with the mulch. It may smother them, may kill some of them, probably not all of them. But it will help. Now, sometimes, mulch is just not enough. Okay, there are some of our weeds that have evolved they don't require light to germinate, and they'll come right through the mulch. Okay, so sometimes herbicides are useful if you've got a weedy area, and there are a few herbicides available in retail. The most common one you'll encounter are the preen products. There are many different preen products, so be aware of that. But we did just one little study where we looked at, the weeds that were, and this is the weight of the weeds. If we just did hand weeding, we got this much. If we used the preen for southern gardens, we reduced our weeds very significantly, okay, about the same as mulch. Okay, and then if you put the herbicide with the mulch, then you got even better weed control. But as you can see here, the mulch was essentially as good as a pre-emergence herbicide program. So that's why I say our first and best defense against annual weeds is a mulch, but sometimes that's not enough, and you can add an herbicide program to that mulch. Okay, If you are going to use herbicides in a landscape for pre-emergence weed control, the granular formulations are safer for plants because let's say the granules just roll off the leaves, right? And there are lots of different herbicides on the market. The most widely used ones, are going to be the Preen product line, which, one of them contains Treflan. One of them contains dithiopyr. Another one contains a combination of Treflan plus Gallery, which is for broadleaf weeds. Okay. The thing you have to realize is as you get products that are more effective on broadleaf weeds, such as isoxaben or the Gallery in this combination product in Preen Plus or Snapshot, that product that's more effective on broadleaves is more likely to damage tender herbaceous ornamentals, right? That is a good rule of thumb that you can count on. If it says it controls broadleaves, then you want to be more cautious about using that in your ornamental landscape beds that have tender flowers, right? So our herbaceous ornamentals are just more sensitive than our trees and shrubs, okay? If you're going to use these herbicides, you're going to think about when are my weeds germinating? They're germinating in the spring. I need the herbicide down in February, basically the same time you're doing your mulching. All right. And then for summer weeds, if you have more weeds that have been coming in the summer, you may need a booster application, shall we say, in May. And then to control the winter annuals, you would do this in September. Now, this is very common for your turf applications. For crabgrass control in the summertime, you go out there in February, second application in May, and then for annual bluegrass, you would do a September 1st application of a pre-emergence herbicide. So this fits the same schedule that you might use in a turfgrass setting. Okay, but choosing the right herbicide, you want to focus on the ornamentals and the safety. Woody plants, there are lots of different herbicides that are available to commercial operations as well as homeowners. And our woody plants, by and large, are quite tolerant of all the herbicides that are on the market. Herbaceous plants differ in their sensitivity to herbicides, and you've got to be more careful about that. Well, how can you be more careful? Well, we've developed some guidelines that you can use. We developed this as the herbicides that are labeled for herbaceous ornamentals. And this is on our extension website. So if you're planting yarrow and you're planting azuratum and you've got some alstroemeria you want to put in you can look in this and see, is Preen Southern. Yeah, it's labeled for yarrow, acarus, agapanthus, ajuga, okay? But you'll also find if we say, okay, well, do not use. So that's what this X means. Don't use anything with Gallery, which means the Preen Plus or Snapshot contains Gallery. And this is just an excerpt of the table. So, the Preen Plus is in the original table that's online as well. So if you are going to, or you're going to be advising clients about herbicides, here's a resource that you can access. Now, when you look at that, it's all based about what is labeled, what is listed on the label. What does that mean? It means the company warranties the safety. The company says this product is safe on that plant. That's what it means. All right, but in color beds, sanitation is our number one friend. To don't let weeds go to seed. Don't let the lawn encroach into the bed, because once it's there, it's difficult to manage, right? Our annual flowers are even more sensitive to herbicide damage than our herbaceous perennials. So there are really only two products that we might use. They're available in retail under various trade names, Pendulum, Preen, and quite a few more. And they do control crabgrass. They do control the oxalis or wood sorrel. They control chickweed. The preen controls henbit. The pendulum, not so much. Okay. So you need to know something about the efficacy as well. What are your most important weeds? Well, grasses are easy to control. Most of our herbicides work on that. Variable control of broadleaf weeds. So as I said, for example, winter annual weeds, preen works on henbit. Okay. But pendulum, just above it there, is not as good on henbit. So if you have a pansy bed that's always been full of henbit and chickweed and annual bluegrass, well, this year you might say, well, you know what? I'm going to plant the pansies, then I'm going to use some preen, with some mulch, and I'll have a clean bed coming into the spring. Okay, so we'll have pansy flowers instead of henbit flowers as the dominant flowers, right? Now we can also look at the summer weeds. There are lots of summer weeds as well. And you'll see the same thing going on, but you'll find that your preen just does not work very well on summer weeds. So that is why if you're going to use herbicides for summer annual weed control, you've got to start thinking, beyond preen, probably to the pendulum or some of the other products I mentioned. To select, excuse me, if you're going to use an herbicide, you want to select the right one. And these tables such as this are available from my website here on the left. Or if you really want to dig deep into it, what is all the things that are fully available, we do have a pest control guide for nursery and landscape plantings, again, linked from my website. If you're using a pre-emergence herbicide or a post-emergence herbicide, you've got to apply them uniformly, right? And I didn't have to go far to find this application. This was actually, unfortunately, right on NC State's campus. And you can see this big pile of yellow. And this is what it looks like up close right there. But that big pile of yellow there, you're going to have too much herbicide, and let's say, for example, you had some, flower bulbs, in the ground underneath that mess. They would be damaged by all that herbicide. But more importantly, you're not going to get weed control over here where the herbicide didn't land. So this is a terrible example of application. Okay, you need to make a uniform application of the way you do that. Measure your area, okay, weigh out the correct amount of this herbicide granule for that area, and then spread it as uniformly as you can. Go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth several times until it's all spread. And if you do that back and forth and back and forth up to 4 times, you're going to get a nice uniform spread. All right. Okay, so that's pre-emergence. What about after the weeds are up? Well, you're never going to get away from some labor. In gardening, there's always going to be some hand weeding, okay? And there's going to be some use of tools to dig things up. If it's got a taproot, we can dig it up. If it's a spreader like this, all you're going to do is chop those things up and make the problem worse, right? Now, it is possible to dig a perennial weed. Don't get me wrong. Okay, if you stay after it, you can dig up mugwort. You can dig up Bermuda grass. You can dig up, any perennial weed if you work at it and stay after it, all right? But there are also post-emergence herbicides that you can use to control these weeds. If it's grasses, think about Bermuda grass encroaching into your landscape bed. There are grass products. I was just advising someone earlier today that had Bermuda grass encroaching into their flower beds, and they had been pulling and pulling and pulling. Well, we have selective grass herbicides such as Grass Begone and Grass Beater. You can spray right over that liriope without injuring it and control the Bermuda grass. Okay, so those things are possible. Nutsedge, that one's a little more difficult to control. And I'm going to say there are herbicides that control nutsedge, okay? But by and large, these are used by commercial operators. Homeowners can buy them, but they're very expensive and they're very tricky to use. So most of the time, we're just using a non-selective product like glyphosate or glufosinate to control nutsedge post-emergence. These things work, okay? But I want to caution you that the new Roundup products on the retail garden shelves do not contain glyphosate and will not control nutsedge. So nutsedge is going to become more of a problem in landscapes, okay, without the use of glyphosate. So you can look carefully and try to find glufosinate that is available in the retail lines under the Bayer Advanced product line, but it is difficult to find. Okay, by 90% of all of the post-emergence weed control in landscapes has historically been with glyphosate. But as I said, the new glyphosate products do not contain glyphosate. They contain mixtures of products, primarily triclopyr, fluazafop, and diquat, and a few other active ingredients. These are synthetic auxin herbicides, and we need to be much more careful in their use. So if you're used to using Roundup weed killer, you've got to be more careful with the new products. And of course, there are alternatives to these. There are, pelargonic acid or sodium nanonoate, ammonium nanonoate. There's a natural form of pelargonic acid, the glufosinate I mentioned, vinegar, and natural oils. They all work, but they don't work as well as glyphosate. For example, glyphosate is here on the left. The glufosinate is, a pretty good replacement for it. You can see it was not as good, and here but it's better if we make multiple applications. It's not as good on Bermuda grass. Here we are 1 week after the application looks pretty good, but 8 weeks later, the Bermuda grass just comes right back. What about other alternatives? And now I'm seeing salt on the garden center shelves. We've never recommended salt for weed control, and I'm not going to start now. The salt is not going to go away. It's going to cause all kinds of problems in the soil. So don't use salt. Don't recommend salt. Flame weeders do work, and the natural products like the vinegar and the vinegar and oils, they work as well. They just don't work as well as synthetic herbicides. Regardless of how you go about controlling your weeds, you want to do it before they go to seed. Okay. 90% of the seed are going to germinate the next year. So if that horseweed drops its seed, it's got 250,000 seed there, 90% of those are going to germinate the next year. Okay, so you want to get rid of them before they go to seed. Some weeds, you've got plenty of time. Horseweed, you're looking at months before it starts to make a seed head. But others, like oxalis and spurge, you're just talking about a few weeks or even some days before you see this and it's shedding seed. The one on the top is mulberry weed or Fatua villosa. That one will produce seed within 12 days of reaching the 2-leaf stage. So this little tiny seedling here will be shedding seed within a day or two. So some weeds, you've got time to get after them. Other weeds, you have to stay on top of them and control them when they are very, very young. What about woody weeds? We have lots of woody weeds in urban landscapes. And we have historically, we've used glyphosate to control them. But honestly, glyphosate isn't as good on woody plants as this product called triclopyr, which is the ingredient in most of our poison ivy killers that are on the garden center shelf. This is now the ingredient in most of the Roundup products as well, but the concentration is lower. So for poison ivy, porcelain vine, but the only thing the only protection you have for your landscape plants is to not get this herbicide on them. You are the protection. So if you are gonna use a product like this that is designed for killing trees and shrubs, you've got to be very careful to keep it off the trees and shrubs. And only you can do that. All right. In summary, landscape weed management, mulches, mulches, mulches. That's our number one defense. Then sanitation. Okay. Keep those weeds from going to seed and keep them from spreading. If you do need to use some herbicides, then our pre-emergence products should be applied in late winter, or again, followed by early summer. If you miss that late winter application, that early summer application isn't going to help much. And then for your winter weeds, that early autumn or, really by September 1, you want an application. Spot treatments with the non-selective either herbicides or vinegar, natural products, but do that when the weeds are small and before they have a chance to spread. All right. Well, a lot of this information is on my website, and I will say that most of the information that I compile on that website is focused for commercial landscape and nursery people. I admit that, but that information is still applicable to any of the commercial landscape materials. There are very few of those products that are not available to homeowners, right? Most of them are available to homeowners as well. So all of the principles apply. All right, with that, I will stop share.
Joe, thank you so much. Particularly your images were so good. And I know that people are going to be referencing the recording of this for many years to come.
You're recording this?
We are recording this. Yes, sir.
Oh my goodness. We got to start over then.
Well, and you did something right at the end there. I might even ask you to put it back up again. There was a request for that slide that had the QR code relating to your book. So people might take advantage of the discount code. So if you put that back up, that'd be wonderful. And
I will be happy
as a reminder,
to.
Thank you. As a reminder to everyone, this is recorded and it's going to be made available on the EMG Internet Continuing Education page. So that is going to be a great reference for you. Couple of questions in the chat I want to share with you, Joe. So one of them was relating to application method. So when we're using a pre-emergent granular, should it be applied over the mulch or under the mulch? Is there an ideal scenario? Is there a big difference?
There is not a big difference. Research, if you dig into the research, you will find that most of the research says to put it down before you mulch. So put it under the mulch. But if you really look at that research, the difference in weed control is very slight. Very slight. And so I just say, if for most landscape settings, it really doesn't matter. And if you're doing color beds, like if you're doing a pansy bed, it's so much easier to plant your bedding plants through the mulch. So you prep the bed, you put the mulch out, then you plant through the mulch, and then you scooch the mulch back up around those little plants. So much easier to do that than it is to plant and then mulch around them. Okay. So in that scenario, what has happened in the past that was a bad practice was, people they prepped the bed, they put the herbicide down, then they planted. And that was terrible. That turned out very badly for the landscape. And unfortunately, that was the days before digital cameras. So I have a slide of that And
Gosh.
but yeah, you know, if you have a choice, if you've got a landscape bed, if you have a choice to put the herbicide down and then do your mulch top dressing, that's the ideal scenario. But if you miss that, go ahead and treat on top of the new top dress of mulch. The pre-emergence herbicides will work pretty well.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're talking about, a nice new or fluffy layer of mulch, not a matted, triple
Mhm.
shredded hardwood that has become like a barrier to water. Then we get that picture of the granules just sitting on top of it, right?
Yeah, the granules will dissipate over time.
Water.
And when you're doing those applications, in February, normally that mulch layer is moist. And this is one of those where I think it's actually, if you're not going to top dress the mulch, it's okay to go ahead and put this right on top of that hardwood mulch in February. And in fact, that mulch layer is where the weeds are going to germinate if you have not top dressed it. Because weeds, weeds grow in bark just fine as long as there's moisture.
Okay,
Yeah.
right, absolutely. All right, then we got some specific questions. So if someone was specifically looking to control, for example, wild violet or something else, would you recommend those tables that you referred us to if you're got a specific plant question on controlling
Yes.
X, Y, or Z? Is that where you would send us?
Yes,
Okay.
we have a table. I have a table on the efficacy of herbicides on weeds. And you can go right to that table and say, okay, I got wild violet. There's a table for pre-emergence herbicides, there's a table for post-emergence. But I'll tell you, if you have wild violets, you just got to learn to appreciate them. They are tough to get rid of. Now you can do it, and this new Roundup, the stuff that's on the market now, contains triclopyr, and triclopyr is actually better than glyphosate on controlling wild violet. So, it may not work as well on Bermuda grass, but it probably will work better on wild violet control.
All right, all
Yeah.
right, excellent. Let's see, another question was a little bit about, do you think of some weeds in a way as good for the soil while they're growing or when they have died back? I think that the person was thinking about clover. Is there anything else in that category that comes to mind for you?
Well, it's not a weed then.
Right, it's got its purpose, doesn't it?
If you like it, if you want it, it's not a weed. So no, I'm being a bit flippant there. Yes, of course. I mean, a related question that I often get is, can I throw these weeds in my compost pile?
Mhm.
Yes. If you are turning the pile and it's actually composting, that actually, as it heats up, it kills the weed seeds. Weeds will compost; they'll do just fine. When I, it's just like mowing the yard. Don't collect the clippings; let them lie. That's organic matter. Returning the organic matter to the soil. Weeds are organic matter as long as you're getting them out of there before they produce flowers and seeds. But if they have already started to produce flowers and seeds, then you got to think about what you're doing with those. I would not return them to the bed. I would then put them into the compost heap where the composting cycle can control some of those seeds.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see.
But there are living plants, like the question was referring to clover. Clover adds nitrogen to the soil. Okay, it's a pollinator-friendly plant. Obviously, the honeybees love it. And our native bees love it too. Okay, and it contributes organic matter back to the soil. So absolutely, yes. I mean, there are plants like that do wonderful things to improve soil condition. Okay.
That's right.
Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, perfect. We're getting a couple different people asking a little bit more about dollar weed and control of dollar weed. Do you want to say anything specific about that?
The only surefire way of taking care of that problem is to sell this property, move somewhere else that does not already have dollar weed. Seriously, dollar weed is extremely difficult to control. And most of the herbicides that are really good on dollar weed are pretty rough on landscape plants. And so this is one of those species where we don't have an easy answer. You're just going to have to be very persistent. And remember that the dollar weed will grow in the lawn, it'll grow in the landscape, it'll come from the neighbor's property and encroach into yours. So you got to look not just in the landscape bed, you got to look to control options for the lawn area as well and do it all together. But again, the landscape bed, if I had dollar weed, I'd be in there with a digging knife and just digging it out as often as I saw it.
Yeah.
I wish
that's
there
what
was an
somebody
easier
was
answer.
referring to. Let's see, another one is relating to just looking at grass be gone.
Mhm.
I guess we're wondering if, or to clarify, if you've got grass be gone with a Bermuda grass invasion, will it kill the flowers in your flower bed?
That's the nice thing about, the grass be gone active ingredient. It kills grasses. It does not kill broadleaf plants. Now, is it 100% safe on all broadleaf plants? No, there are a few exceptions. Okay. Ground cover junipers. If you have one of the blue-green ground cover junipers, if you ever have had difficulty telling the difference between Bar Harbor and blue rug juniper, I got the answer to that. Spray them both with grass be gone, and the Bar Harbor will die. The blue rug will grow just fine. It's weird, but it happens. So it's not 100%, but it's about 99% of broadleaf plants are uninjured by the grass be gone. Now, if you have, say, a petunia and it's in full flower when you do that application, on a sunny, warm day, you can burn the flower petals. The flower petals are more sensitive to chemical injury than the leaves are. But the next flower that opens will be it'll be perfectly safe. Yeah.
And grass be gone would have been, someone's asking, what was the product reference for ridding centipede grass in Liriope? Grass be gone would similarly be a recommendation in that case. You had a bed of Liriope.
Centipede, is better on Bermuda grass, but yes, it does work
Okay.
on centipede as well.
One of your slides towards the end talked a little bit about the fact that glyphosate resistance is more and more widespread. And so, are there any references on that, whether we can dig them up now or later, Joe, but people are getting frustrated perhaps trying to use glyphosate on some persistent weeds and they're seeing poor results. Maybe we've learned, oh yeah, it's becoming more resistant to that.
I haven't heard a single complaint from landscapers about it.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that is landscapers cannot wait. They have to control it, right? So the landscapers, they sprayed it, and then that one weed growing in there didn't die. The landscapers are obligated to reach down, grab that weed, and get rid of it the next time they're on the property, right? Compare that to a farmer that has sprayed a 300-acre farm with glyphosate, and there are some weeds that are not controlled. The farmer is not walking those fields pulling the escaped weeds. They tolerate the presence of a few weeds in a field. And that's how glyphosate resistance builds. And so in landscapes, we're not just leaving those weeds. Okay. So we're not seeing a lot of, I haven't heard a single complaint, but I do know, and most of the commercial landscape operators do know that they have glyphosate resistant weeds, mostly horseweed. Horseweed is the most widely encountered glyphosate resistant weed because it just seems to escape notice for quite some time. And then it's like overnight, oh my gosh, where did this come from? No, it was there for 6 months. It germinated in October. It just sat there as a rosette until June when it started growing. So it's just a little bit elusive in that way. But we don't have pigweed in landscape beds because mulches control it so well. And that's the other big glyphosate resistant weed. The one we have to watch for is annual ryegrass. There is glyphosate resistant annual ryegrass in the state. And if that starts spreading, that could be bad. We do have glyphosate resistant annual bluegrass in the state. And that could be bad too, because the grass begone does not control annual bluegrass. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful just in the bigger picture as we may hear around us glyphosate resistance. What does that mean? Here's a good explanation of the difference between a landscape environment and a farming environment.
Much more problematic for farmers. And landscapes, just, if it didn't die, pull it out. That's, sanitation. If we just practice sanitation, then we will prevent that from being a problem in landscapes.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to gather some of the resources that you have referred to, as I usually do after the webinars, and all the links that you're seeing in the chat, everyone. We will gather those and send them out in a follow-up email. Specifically, I think that will help you address your specific questions. If we send you those tables that Joe's referring to, where you can look at what's available pre and post emergent for specific weeds, you'll get some more answers to some of these specific questions. So I want to thank you, Joe, once again from all of us. We had over 210 people on here live, and I know it'll be watched many more times in the next week, just when the recording comes out and then referred to. So it's been a great presentation from the biology to the control. I think we all got a great refresher, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. And I am always amazed that you managed to sit through a whole hour of me talking on a Zoom session. Yeah.
A lot of people did.
Everybody gets a pat on the back for that.
Well, we tried to make this, we made it at 1 o'clock, thinking maybe it's a little hot out now, and people came inside.
Yeah, it's nap time.
That is true. It is nap time.
I had to delay my nap to do this. Yeah.
Well, we're even more grateful. Lots of compliments coming into the chat, Joe, and we thank you and your willingness to share with us.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And stay tuned for your email. You'll receive a follow-up email from me, and then keep an eye on the continuing education page on the EMG intranet for the recording. It's usually available in a day or so. All right. Take care, and we'll see you next time.